Hey guys, tonight we slip through the candlelight of a world long gone, into the whispers and flickers of the Middle Ages, where power isn't always worn like a crown. And the hands that shape the future are often ink-stained, calloused, or folded in prayer. You stand in a cold stone hallway, torches sputtering against the damp air. A monk gliding past you in silence, his robes brushing the flagstones like the sound of turning pages. The air smells of beeswax, dust, and something ancient faith itself. Maybe. You probably wouldn't survive this place. Between famine, fevers, and that delightful habit of drinking whatever was nearest, the odds are low. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking through a monastery somewhere in 9th century Europe, though it's hard to tell where exactly it could be Ireland, France, or Italy. The world beyond these walls is chaotic. Kingdoms rise and crumble faster than rumors travel, and bandits turn highways into gambling tables of survival. But inside, it's calm. The quiet here isn't emptiness, it's the sound of civilization being rebuilt. You pass through the scriptorium, where hunched figures scratch away at parchment. Each stroke of the quill isn't just writing Nietzsche's defiance against forgetting. These monks, unknown to the world, are copying the wisdom of Aristotle, the medical treatises of Galen, the geometry of Euclid. Not because they're planning a renaissance, but because order, beauty, and truth feel like prayers. Historians still argue whether the monks fully understood the importance of what they were preserving or if it was simply habit, devotion, or fear of divine punishment that kept them writing. A droplet of ink falls on the page, and you watch a brother carefully blot it out. The smell of vellum calfskin stretched and scraped to silky thinness fills the room. You hear the creak of wooden benches, the faint sigh of concentration. Someone's stomach growls. Dinner is boiled cabbage and barley again. The mainstream story tells you kings and knights shaped the medieval world, but that's only half the tale. The true architects were those who spent their lives kneeling in stone cells, whispering prayers, grinding pigments, and counting syllables in Latin. In the Dark Ages, light came from oil lamps, sand from stubborn, ink-stained fingers. There's one particularly curious monk named Edfrith, living on a small island off the English coast, who paints holy manuscripts so intricate that modern scientists have to use microscopes to see how fine his brushstrokes were. He mixes pigments with honey and egg whites. The blue alone is made from crushed lapis lazuli that came all the way from Afghanistan. That's right, the global economy already reaches his tiny monastery. Quietly, through trade and faith, the world is more connected than anyone realizes. The walls here aren't just for prayer, they're laboratories. In one room, herbs dry in bundles from the rafters. Sage for wounds, yarrow for fever, and something called dragon's blood, which turns out to be tree resin. Medicine and magic are still cousins. A monk records which herbs seem to help the sickest pilgrims, while another measures the stars outside to mark the passing of the seasons. He doesn't know it yet, but he's practicing early astronomy. You wander into the chapel where chants echo softly. The rhythm feels hypnotic, almost mathematical. It's not just worship, it's structure, a way of keeping time before clocks were common. Monks mark every few hours with prayer, dividing the day into sacred intervals. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. The world beyond the abbey might be chaos, but inside, time has meaning. Every hour stitched neatly to the next. And here's a fun tidbit. Some monasteries brewed beer because the water wasn't safe to drink. The brewing monks accidentally discovered fermentation techniques that would eventually fuel European economies and, centuries later, your weekend plans. There's even a record of one abbey being so proud of its ale that it offered free samples to visiting bishops. The church works in mysterious ways. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life here is punishing. You rise before dawn, pray until your knees ache, and fast for days. The cold seeps through your robes in winter. Books are treasures. A single Bible can take 2 years to make. Every letter, every line is an act of endurance. And yet, that's exactly what shapes the medieval world. The endurance of quiet people who never make history books but preserve the world inside them. Beyond these walls, Europe is still finding its feet. Empires have fallen, roads crumble, literacy drops like a stone into a well. But in the monasteries, knowledge doesn't die. It just goes into hiding, waiting for the right moment to reappear. When you trace a modern textbook's lineage, it runs straight through these cloisters. The secret force here isn't sword or wealth, it's patience. One story tells of a monk named Winithor in St. Gall Abbey, who added doodles of fighting bears and dragons in the margins of holy manuscripts. Historians still argue whether he was just bored or sneaking pagan. Symbols into the margins, a quiet rebellion inside divine texts. Either way, his little sketches give us a glimpse of a human beneath the habit. You can almost imagine him chuckling as he drew a bear punching a knight. The world outside keeps shifting. Vikings raid from the north. Plagues sweep through towns. Yet, inside these abbeys, the rhythm never breaks. Every candle lit, every psalm sung is a declaration that meaning still exists. You feel a strange peace walking through these stone halls, a reminder that civilization doesn't rise through noise, but through persistence. As centuries pass, the quiet work multiplies. Monasteries become centers of innovation. They perfect watermills for grinding grain, develop systems for storing fish through winter, and even experiment with early forms of accounting to track donations and rents. It's not glamorous, but it's revolutionary. By standardizing these systems, they lay the groundwork for medieval economics and, eventually, capitalism itself. And yet, faith drives it all. Every act of labor is considered divine service. You write not for fame, but for God. You brew beer, plant barley, mend shoes, all for the same reason: salvation. Faith becomes the operating system of the medieval mind, quietly coordinating every human action from the humblest farmer to the most learned scholar. Here's where the first real tension brews, between knowledge and obedience. Some monks begin asking questions the church doesn't like. Why does the sun move the way it does? What if Aristotle was right about the earth being round? You can sense the first sparks of curiosity pushing against faith's walls. Historians still argue whether these questions were acts of devotions seeking to understand God's creation or quiet acts of rebellion that would one day ignite the Renaissance. For now, those questions stay whispered. The louder voices belong to bishops and kings, but they depend on these silent scribes. In a way, the monks are the medieval world's hard drive, storing and backing up everything humanity knows while the rest of Europe crashes and reboots. It's tempting to think of history as a series of loud events, battles, coronations, discoveries, but the truth is more subtle. The Middle Ages hum like a low, steady note beneath the noise of time. The real engine of civilization is quiet devotion, steady craft, and an unshakable belief that order matters. You pass one last monk on your way out. He's young, maybe 16, and he looks up from his manuscript, his fingers stained with ink. For a second, you catch his gaze. He doesn't know he's saving the world. He just wants to finish his page before Vespers. And that's the strange beauty of it. History isn't built by heroes shouting from battlements, it's built by hands that never expect to be seen. The bell tolls, low and steady. Evening falls, the light fades to gold, and the hum of chanting rises again. You step back into the courtyard, the scent of wet stone thick in the air. The world outside might still be dark, but inside these walls, the candles keep burning. You leave the monastery behind and step into the mud, literally. The quiet corridors of faith give way to the heartbeat of the medieval world, the peasant fields. Dawn breaks cold and pink, mist curling like breath from the earth, and you stand ankle-deep in the same muck that fed empires. Out here, the silent force isn't parchment or praerit sweat. Every loaf of bread, every jug of ale, every gilded chalice in a cathedral depends on people like the ones you see now. Stooped figures with cracked hands, bent backs, and no name that history remembers. A rooster crows somewhere far off, and you can almost smell breakfast smoke. Barley porridge, and maybe, if luck smiles, a slice of onion. The air is heavy with manure and dew. Not glamorous, sure, but it's the scent of survival. You probably wouldn't last a week here. Between famine, taxes, and disease, it's like playing life on hard mode with no respawns. The peasants start early, before the sun is even up. They're tying oxen to wooden plows, the creak of leather and wood marking time like a slow heartbeat. You notice how they move in rhythm with the land plant? Pray, harvest, repeat. There's no vacation, no concept of weekend. The church calendar defines every day instead. Saints' days, holy days, fasting days. Work and worship blur until they feel like the same thing. It's strange, but the villagers don't seem bitter. They gossip, sing, laugh when they can. One man tells a joke about a priest and a donkey that's been circulating since Charlemagne's day, and the laughter ripples through the fields like a breeze. There's comfort in routine, even in hardship. The mainstream history books love their knights and castles. But the truth is this: the peasants are the real infrastructure. Without them, no battles are fought, no kings are crowned, no abbeys built. Their grain fills the granaries. Their wool clothes the nobles. Their taxes fuel the wars. You're walking on the hidden foundation of medieval society. The average peasant lives in a wattleland daub hut, walls plastered with mud and straw. Smoke curls through a hole in the roof because chimneys aren't quite standard yet. Chickens wander in and out like nosy roommates. Privacy, non-existent. Families sleep together on straw mats, wrapped in wool or whatever scraps they have. If you think your mattress is bad, imagine one that smells like last year's harvest. There's a quirky fact you probably didn't expect. Peasants had more days off than many modern workers. Thanks to the church, about 1/3 of the year was technically a holy day, meaning no plowing allowed. Of course, rest often meant repairing fences, brewing ale, or attending endless masses, but still, not a bad deal for the 1300s. Historians still argue whether peasants truly lived in constant misery, or if we've romanticized their suffering to make later progress look impressive. Some records suggest villages had communal celebrations, feasts, even theater performances, waddy plays acted out in barns. The medieval world might be grim, but it's not joyless. You watch as a woman hauls water from a nearby stream. She's strong, silent, moving with practiced ease. Every trip she makes carries about 20 kilos of liquid necessity. She doesn't know it, but her labor keeps an entire household alive. She's part of the invisible network, the arteries of survival. The rhythm of village life is a balance between fear and faith. A bad harvest could mean death. A late frost could ruin everything. And yet, every spring they plant again, trusting the same earth that sometimes betrays them. It's not optimism, it's necessity. You don't choose faith here. You breathe it. You hear the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. That's the village's other secret heart. His forge burns day and night, shaping tools, hinges, and horseshoes. Without him, the fields stop. You wander closer, watching sparks fly like tiny comets. The blacksmith wipes his brow, leaving a streak of soot across his face. He grins at you. Iron and God, he says, keep the world turning. He's not wrong. In a way, the medieval village is an ecosystem, each person, a node. The miller grinds the grain, the baker bakes the bread, the brewer makes the ale. And everyone prays the tax collector gets a toothache and skips their house. It's a fragile balance, but it works. Quietly, efficiently, endlessly. Somewhere near the edge of the village stands a manor home to the local lord. You can see its wooden palisade and the faint shimmer of armor from the guards. The peasants owe him labor and rent, but they also depend on his protection. It's a strange relationship, part oppression, part mutual survival. The Lord takes, but he also shields them from raiders, wolves, and worse, the king's taxmen. Every spring, peasants owe the boon work, unpaid labor on the Lord's lands. You can almost feel their weariness as they trudge uphill with shovels and spades, patching fences that don't belong to them. Yet they sing as they work. Maybe it's defiance, maybe it's habit. One verse floats across the air. He who tills not, eats not. A simple truth, one that outlasts every war. Inside a small cottage, you find a loom humming with motion. A girl barely 12 sits weaving wool into cloth. Her fingers move faster than thought. The pattern so precise it looks like magic. Her mother teaches her without words, each motion inherited through generations. That fabric will one day warm someone she'll never meet. The entire medieval economy runs on threads like these, literal and invisible. You take a step outside, and the smell of rain begins to drift through the air. Everyone moves faster now, covering haystacks, calling in the livestock. The peasants know nature like an old friend, fickle, generous, unpredictable. The soil itself is their clock, their teacher, their god in disguise. And yet, beyond all this hardship, there's an odd freedom in being unseen. Nobles might rule, but peasants endure. Empires fall, the fields remain. When the Black Death sweeps through in the 14th century, killing nearly half of Europe, the survivors' peasants among them inherit opportunity. Fewer hands mean higher wages, more bargaining power. Quietly, without revolts or banners, the social order begins to bend. Historians still argue whether this shift marks the birth of the modern working class or just a temporary shuffle before the next round of exploitation. But the seed is planted. The idea that labor has value, that the hands holding the plow deserve more than crumbs. You glance at a young farmer repairing his thatched roof. He wipes rain from his eyes and laughs, muttering something about the Lord's leaks being bigger. It's not rebellion, it's resilience. Humor is survival here. One medieval proverb even says, "Better a belly full of beer than a heart full of sorrow." You suspect they took that one seriously. As night falls, the village transforms. Candles flicker through tiny windows, fires crackle, and the smell of stew thickens the air. You can hear faint music, someone plucking a lute, children giggling before bed, a dog barking at shadows. Life feels small, yes, but complete. In one corner of the square, an old man tells stories to whoever will listen. Tales of saints who walked across rivers, knights who spoke with angels, and devils that hid in cabbage patches. You chuckle, but these stories aren't nonsense, they're glue. They bind the community together, explain storms and sickness, and make meaning out of chaos. The oral tradition is their library, passed from mouth to mouth while parchment remains rare. A quirky tidbit here. Medieval peasants believed that bread baked on Midsummer's Eve never went moldy. Superstition? Maybe. But you imagine a mother saving that loaf all year, breaking pieces off during storms, whispering prayers between bites. Faith and folklore are the same language, just different accents. You lie back against a wooden fence and watch the stars. No city lights, no noise. Just the endless hush of crickets and wind through barley. You start to understand something. Civilization isn't just written in marble and gold, it's grown from mud, calluses, and shared labor. And the truth. The peasants might have had the least, but they touched the world the most. Every tool, every wall, every field was their legacy. They were the medieval internet, an invisible network connecting castles, abbeys, and cities through grain, gossip, and sheer endurance. When you stand up, your boots are heavy with earth. It clings to you, grounding you in their world. This mud built cathedrals, funded wars, and fed scholars. The next time someone says medieval, don't picture knights on horseback. Picture this: a woman with a sickle, a man with a plow. Children laughing beside a smoky fire, a quiet, unbreakable rhythm that holds everything together. The bell from the monastery rings faintly in the distance, echoing across the fields. The monks pray, the peasants rest. Two halves of the same world, each unaware they're holding the other up. You take one last look at the flickering cottages, each one a tiny lantern against the dark. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of earth, rain, and smoke. The day is done, but the work, this secret pulse of the medieval world, never truly stops. You wake to the low hum of morning bells and the soft chatter of women drawing water at the village well. The air smells faintly of ash, bread, and something stewing in clay pots. The men are already in the fields. But this part of the village hums with a different kind of energy, one that doesn't swing a scythe, yet still holds everything together. Here, behind the walls, women weave the quiet rhythm of survival. You walk past open doorways and see them everywhere, kneeling, stirring, stitching, balancing baskets on their heads with regal precision. They move through the day like clockwork, though there's no clock to guide them. Every action is muscle memory, passed from mother to daughter like an unwritten code. And make no mistake, while history books sing about knights and kings, it's these women who keep the medieval world from collapsing. Inside a small cottage, a young woman named Anselma kneads dough on a rough wooden table. Her hands are white with flour, her sleeves rolled up, her face flushed from the fire. She's humming a hymn, something about St. Bridget blessing the hearth. You watch as she carves a cross into the dough with a knife, half devotion, half superstition. She doesn't think about it. It's simply what's done. The bread will rise better if the heavens approve. Historians still argue whether medieval women were truly oppressed or simply confined by the era's roles. The truth, as usual, lives somewhere in the middle. On parchment, men ruled everything. But in practice, behind those parchment laws, women ruled households, trades, and sometimes entire domains. You just had to know where to look. Let's start small. In every village, the midwife is the real authority. She knows herbs that can heal or end life. She carries the secrets of childbirth, infection, and sometimes contraception, though no one dares call it that aloud. To men, she's both miracle and menace. Too many successful healings, and she's a saint. One gone wrong, and she's a witch. You can almost hear the uneasy respect in the whispers as she passes. Then there are the nuns. Monks are the librarians of the medieval world. Nuns are its quiet administrators. Behind cloister walls, they manage estates, educate girls, copy manuscripts, and sometimes write their own. You might know the name Hildegard of Bingen. She composed music, designed herbal remedies, and wrote theological visions so bold they startled bishops. She even invented her own secret language, lingua ignota, to describe things Latin couldn't. That's not rebellion, it's reinvention. One fringe tidbit: some convents brewed beer. Yes, beer again. Apparently, holiness pairs well with hops. These Brewster nuns kept recipes that balanced divine patience with yeast science centuries before anyone called it chemistry. If you've ever enjoyed a good ale, you might owe thanks to a woman in a wimple. But the most powerful women aren't necessarily cloistered, they're political ghosts. Queens like Eleanor of Aquitaine rule from behind silk curtains, whispering orders while men wear crowns. She commands armies through letters, negotiates with kings, and funds troubadours who spread her legend. Even today, historians still argue whether Eleanor's courtly love movement was a social revolution or just very expensive flirting. Either way, she turned romance into power. You pass through a market square buzzing with women traders. Despite the stereotypes, many medieval women work openly, selling herbs, baking bread, weaving cloth, brewing ale, or running inns. Guild records from London and Paris list dozens of female names: craftswomen, merchants, brewers. Some even inherit their husbands' guild rights and continue the trade themselves. A few signatures survive on dusty parchment, confident and curving proof that women's hands helped write the economic story too. There's a blacksmith's wife here who sharpens tools as deftly as any man. She jokes that the forge listens to her better than her husband does. The others laugh, and for a moment, the marketplace feels timeless. You could drop a coffee cart here, and it would fit right in. Same gossip, same rhythms, just fewer lattes. In the background, a mother scolds her son for stealing an apple. He grins, mud on his cheeks, and she sighs, shaking her head before smacking him lightly with a loaf of bread. The domestic comedy is eternal. You can almost hear her mutter something like, "Saints, preserve me." He's his father's child, but not all women's influence is domestic. Some wield real, literal power. You find yourself walking through the halls of a castle. Now a lady of the manor sits in a chair carved with vines, her gown pooling around her like water. Her husband is off fighting somewhere in France, so she's managing hundreds of workers, collecting rents, settling disputes. When a peasant brings her a promenade lost ox, a broken plough, she decides it with calm authority. She may not wear armor, but her word can feed or ruin families. In times of war, noble women defend fortresses, negotiate truces, even lead troops. Matilda of Tuscany did just that, holding castles against emperors. Her name survives in chronicles, but countless others vanish into silence. Their power was temporary, conditional, but real enough to shape outcomes. The quiet force of necessity. When men went to war, women ran the world. You pause in a convent garden, herbs glistening with dew. A nun hums as she grinds leaves into paste, noting each combination in a small book. God gave us cures in secret, she murmurs. We just have to listen. That line could be the motto of the entire age. Faith and pragmatism blend seamlessly here. No one sees contradiction in mixing prayer with potion. The garden smells of sage and lavender. You close your eyes and imagine hundreds of such gardens across Europe, each one a living pharmacy, tended by women whose names have faded, but whose recipes endure. One odd historical footnote. In some regions, women could own land and pass it to daughters if they survived long enough to see it recognized. It wasn't equality, but it was a loophole, and they knew how to use it. Quiet cunning was a survival skill. You wander through a cottage again and notice a loom by the fire. The weaver's hands move in patterns older than the Crusades. Each thread crosses another, the rhythm hypnotic. In that moment, it's hard not to see the metaphor. Each thread, a life, weaving history's unseen fabric. She looks up at you and grins. The men think they build the world, she says. We mend it. She laughs softly and returns to her weaving. There's no bitterness in her voice, just truth. Even religion bends around this feminine gravity. The Virgin Mary isn't just a saint here. She's a symbol of compassion, intercession, and divine strength. Churches dedicate themselves to her. Songs praise her. And in her image, women find quiet dignity in a world that often silences them. Of course, not everyone sees them as holy. The late Middle Ages bring whispers of witchcraft, and the line between healer and heretic grows thin. Midwives, herbalists, and widows become easy targets. The same knowledge that once saved lives becomes a reason for suspicion. Historians still argue whether witch trials were rooted in genuine fear or just power struggles dressed in superstition. Probably both, but even persecution can't erase presence. The female voice hums beneath every medieval story: songs, letters, prayers, gossip. In troubadour poetry, noble women are both muse and master, commanding adoration like it's their birthright. In peasant songs, they're witty, earthy, and sharp-tongued. The medieval world doesn't so much silence women as it whispers them between the lines. Night falls, and you hear music drifting from the manor again. Inside, ladies and servants gather near the hearth, their faces warm in the glow. A young girl tells a tale of a night bewitched by moonlight, her voice lilting, confident. For a moment, everyone forgets rank. They're just humans, chasing warmth and wonder before the dark swallows the hour. You lean against the wall and listen, realizing that in this world, women's influence is like water. It fills every space, shapes every structure, yet rarely gets credit for the foundation it creates. Outside, the moon hangs silver over the rooftops. Somewhere, a baby cries. Somewhere, a bell tolls for compline prayers. The world moves as it always does, powered by hands that never rest. You take one last look at the women around the hearth, their laughter rising like soft music. Tomorrow, they'll wake before dawn again, light fires, bake bread, and keep the world turning. They won't be remembered in chronicles or carved in marble. But without them, no monastery, no kingdom, no cathedral would stand for long. The medieval world breathes through their unseen rhythm, most secret and most human, force. You leave the manor's soft candlelight and step into a city rising from Vaga, medieval town just waking. Its cobblestones slick with rain and the faint smell of yeast drifting from a bakery. Bells toll the hour, blacksmiths hammer, and from behind shuttered doors, voices murmur in a dozen dialects. You can almost hear the sound of progress being hammered, stitched, brewed, and bargained for. This is where the next quiet force hides, the guilds and the invisible codes that shape the very bones of the medieval world. You walk down a narrow lane called Tanner's Row, where hides hang like ghosts. A man in a leather apron nods at you, his hands stained dark from oak bark and lye. The guild mark, a small wooden tablet carved with symbols, hangs proudly over his door. It's not just decoration, it's law. You don't work in this town unless a guild says so. The guilds are the keepers of skill, honor, and, quietly, monopoly. They're the secret scaffolding of civilization. Picture them as medieval trade unions, but with incense, oaths, and a hint of espionage. The blacksmiths, the carpenters, the weavers, the masons, all organized, all sworn to protect their craft. Join a guild, and you gain protection, prestige, and training. Betray it, and you lose everything. It's a system both sacred and ruthless. Inside a carpenter's workshop, the scent of pine and sawdust wraps around you. Prentices sweep floors, journeymen carve beams, and the master inspects the joinery, eyes sharp as hawk talons. He teaches not just how to build, but how to belong. Every trade has its code, passed orally, in whispers and rituals that outsiders never see. Some guilds even stage mock funerals for apprentices who complete their training, symbolizing their rebirth as masters. A little dramatic, maybe, but effective branding. Historians still argue whether these guilds truly protected craftsmen or simply created closed clubs that stifled innovation. Some call them proto-capitalists, others call them medieval monopolists. Either way, they're essential. Without them, cathedrals don't rise, bridges don't hold, and the city economy collapses into chaos. You wander deeper into the maze of streets and reach the mason's quarter. Here, the true secret lies not in what they build, but in how. The stonemasons' guilds guard knowledge older than memory, geometry, symmetry, and the physics of arches. They're the ones who turn dreams into stone. Every cathedral, every fortress is a coded message in limestone. A mason kneels over a block, carving an abstract symbol that looks almost like graffiti. He calls it his mark. Each craftsman signs his work this way, an early form of authorship in a world where names rarely survive. You run your fingers over one, feeling the grooves. This mark will outlive its maker by centuries. The guilds have rituals too. Initiation feasts, secret handshakes, even coded greetings. They swear on holy relics to guard their trade's mysteries. It's tempting to see them as proto-secret societies, and maybe they were. Some historians whisper that Freemasonry, centuries later, inherits more than just symbolism from these medieval brotherhoods. It inherits the very idea that knowledge should be protected through ritual. You step inside a tavern where the journeymen gather after work. Their laughter shakes the rafters, ale foams in wooden mugs, and songs fill the air. The lyrics are full of pride and jokes about lazy lords who couldn't hammer a nail straight. You smile. The medieval class system is rigid. But here, within these smoky walls, there's equality among craft. The innkeeper slides a loaf toward you. It's dense, dark, and probably weapon-grade by modern standards, but warm. "You from the Masons?" she asks. You shake your head. "Ah," she says. "Then you're either noble or useless. You nearly choke on your bread." That's joke number 1 tonight. At the next table, an older Mason leans in, telling a story. He speaks of a cathedral so tall it touched the clouds of a master builder who vanished after carving a face no one could recognize into the highest spire. "Some say it's the Virgin," he whispers. Others say it's himself. Historians still argue whether this story is folklore or truth. But every Mason swears it happened somewhere Chartres, Rouen, or maybe in dreams. The point isn't the face. It's the mystery. Every great work of the Middle Ages has secrets built into it, mathematical ratios hidden in windows, sacred geometry in doorways, encoded stories in stone. The builders don't just make cathedrals, they write cosmic poetry in architecture. You step outside into the square. The half-finished skeleton of a church looms above you, scaffolding like ribs, bells not yet hung. Masons climb the structure, balancing on narrow planks hundreds of feet up, humming hymns to keep rhythm. They're not just laborers, they're artists, engineers, dreamers with chisels. Here's a fun tidbit. Medieval construction was so precise that modern engineers still puzzle over how they managed such accuracy with rope, chalk, and intuition. The answer lies in a mental geometry so ingrained that it never needed to be written down. The body itself became a measuring tool, the length of a forearm, the spread of a hand, the reach of an arm. Human proportions shaping divine structures. You duck into a narrow alley lined with candle makers, parchment sellers, and goldsmiths. Each trade forms its own tiny world with its own hierarchy. Apprentices dream of earning their freedom. Journeymen wander from town to town like freelancers, and masters, well, masters wield quiet empires. Some even lend money discreetly to nobles in debt. It's a strange inversion, the calloused hand feeding the crown. And yet, not all guilds are equal. The cloth merchants grow rich while cobblers barely scrape by. Power starts to tilt toward commerce, and you can feel the medieval world shifting slowly, quietly, but unmistakably toward capitalism. Coins jingle in purses. Ledgers appear. Numbers start to matter as much as prayers. You find yourself standing before a shop of a merchant who sells glass, delicate, shimmering, impossibly clear. He tells you proudly it comes from Venice. Trade routes are expanding, cities are swelling, and guilds are the ones making sure standards don't crumble under greed. A cracked goblet or a crooked beam isn't just bad craftsmanship, sin. Every work is an offering. There's an odd kind of spirituality here. In cathedrals, monks pray. In workshops, craftsmen create. Both acts are worship in their own way. The guild motto often echoes the same sentiment. To labor is to pray. Historians still argue whether this religious framing was genuine faith or just smart branding to avoid suspicion. After all, calling your business holy work is an excellent way to dodge taxes and moral lectures. Medieval marketing at its finest. As dusk falls, the city transforms again. Candles flicker in shop windows, and the apprentices sweep sawdust into the gutters. You pass a baker locking up, his arms white with flour. He nods, mutters Dio gratias, and heads home. His day began before dawn and ends after dark, yet he hums softly, proud of his loaves. You pause near the Guildhall, a grand timber building with carved symbols above its doors. Inside, the masters gather for a feast. Roasted meat, ale, laughter. But behind the merriment, business is being conducted. Prices fixed, disputes settled, alliances forged. It's politics, just wrapped in wood smoke and prayer. One man stands to make a toast. To the hands that build, he says. For kings may command, but hands create. The hall erupts in cheers. It's not rebellion, it's pride. A declaration that labor itself holds sacred value. You step back into the night, the streets glistening under a thin drizzle. Somewhere, a mason's hammer still echoes faintly in the dark, like a heartbeat. Every strike is both craft and conviction. You realize these guilds, with all their secrecy and ritual, aren't just protecting trades, they're protecting identity. To belong to a guild is to know who you are in a chaotic world. You stop before a cathedral under construction and gaze up. Its spires reach toward the stars, not yet finished, but already magnificent. Every stone tells a story of faith, skill, and ambition. 1,000 hands have touched it, peasants carrying stones, women weaving ropes, children fetching water, masons carving angels that look suspiciously like their neighbors. It's not just architecture. It's the medieval internet, every profession, every life linked in the vast network of creation. The rain softens to mist, and you breathe in the scent of wet stone and wood. Somewhere inside that cathedral, centuries from now, tourists will whisper in awe, unaware of the secret brotherhoods that shaped it. They'll never know the names carved into invisible corners, the codes hidden in spirals and arches, the prayers built into geometry. You turn away, feet echoing on cobblestones. And the thought lingers. The medieval world isn't built by thunder or conquest, it's built by hands. United in silent agreement, guided by rules older than kings. The guilds will fade one day, replaced by factories, patents, and profit margins. But for now, they rule quietly, unseen but absolute, their marks etched into every stone, every tool, every law. And as the city sleeps, its heart still beats beneath the noise, the steady rhythm of work, faith, and pride. You wake to the slow clang of church bells rolling through the mist, like bronze waves over rooftops. The air tastes faintly of rain and bread. You're still in that medieval city, but this morning, the story tilts toward a quieter kind of power, the spiritual pulse that moves through every street and farm, unseen yet absolute. Faith, not just the grand cathedrals and Latin chants, but the deep private rituals that anchor the medieval soul. You drift through the city gates and into the countryside again. The road twists between wheat fields glinting with dew, and the smell of damp soil hits you earthy, honest, ancient. A farmer kneels beside his ox, tracing the sign of the cross in the dirt before yoking the animal. It's not superstition, it's insurance. Every act begins with blessing, from sowing seeds to baking bread. You watch him whisper to the soil, a half prayer, half contract. If heaven keeps its end, the harvest will rise. This isn't organized religion, this is lived religion. The world itself is divine, every stone, every breeze, every loaf. Even the weeds have saints. Somewhere in a hedgerow, a woman gathers herbs, muttering the names of Saint Fiacre and Saint Hildegard, blending medicine and faith until they're indistinguishable. Historians still argue whether this was science disguised as spirituality or spirituality disguised as science. Either way, it kept people alive. You reach a village chapel, small and crooked, but alive with sound. Inside, candles flicker like trapped stars. The priest chants softly, Latin words few understand, but everyone feels. Incense fills your lungs, and suddenly the world seems to slow, as if time itself bends to the rhythm of ritual. You realize that in a world without clocks, prayer is the schedule. Morning bell, noon bell, evening bell, the medieval heartbeat. A group of peasants kneels before a wooden statue of Mary, her paint chipped but her face serene. A woman whispers into her hand, placing it against the statue's foot. She's asking not for miracles, but for endurance. That's what most people prayed for back then. Not glory, not riches, just enough strength to wake up tomorrow. You step back outside and follow a dirt path toward a monastery on the hill. The building looms quiet and clean, its stones humming with discipline. Monks move through the cloister like shadows, robes brushing the floor, voices never raised. It's oddly comforting, like living inside a whisper. You catch the scent of baking bread again, mixed with parchment and ink. The scriptorium glows with morning light. Inside, rows of monks bend over desks, copying manuscripts. Quills scratch softly, turning silence into preservation. They're not writing for fame. They're writing so memory doesn't die. The entire intellectual world of Europe balanced on a few tired wrists. One sneeze, one candle knocked over, and centuries of thought could vanish. You hover near one monk whose steady hand traces blue and gold into the margins. Tiny dragons curl around the words of Augustine, while saints dance in the corners of Psalms. He pauses, stretches his fingers, and glances towards you with a faint, knowing smiles if he senses your modern impatience and finds it mildly amusing. Here's your first joke tonight. If a medieval monk had access to modern autocorrect, he'd probably excommunicate it by lunchtime. The monastery isn't just a house of prayer, it's a data center, a school, a hospital, a charity hub. In an age where kings fall like dominoes, monks keep the lights on literally and spiritually. Historians still argue whether monasteries slowed down progress by hoarding knowledge or preserved it by protecting it from chaos. The truth, as always, probably sits in the candlelight between the two. You follow a monk into the garden, where neat rows of herbs glisten with dew. Sage for cleansing, lavender for calm, rosemary for memory. Each plant has both medicinal and mystical meaning. To a monk, tending these gardens isn't just agriculture, it's theology. Healing the body means healing creation itself. In a small corner, a bee hums lazily over thyme blossoms. The monk smiles, murmuring that bees are holy creatures, symbols of order and diligence. Some abbeys even write bee sermons, comparing their hives to perfect Christian communities. Busy, harmonious, sweetly productive. You can't help but imagine a monk scolding a lazy novice by saying, "Even the bees work harder than you." The monastery bell rings again, and the brothers file into the chapel for prayer. You listen as their voices blend a single, resonant note of faith that fills the stone hall. There's something mathematical about it, too. The rhythm of chant mirrors the geometry of the architecture, sound and structure working together to reach the divine. As the last amen fades, you slip outside. The sun climbs higher, and the fields shimmer. In the distance, a line of pilgrims trudges toward the horizon. Their cloaks are dusty, their feet bare, but their eyes gleam with purpose. Pilgrimage, another quiet force that shaped the medieval mind. You fall in beside them, your steps joining theirs. Some carry walking sticks carved with scallop shells, the mark of Santiago. Others hold small reliquaries, bits of bone or cloth said to belong to saints. To modern eyes, it looks like superstition. To them, it's spiritual currency. Each mile walked buys a little forgiveness, a little grace. The road hums with stories. One man tells of a miracle spring that healed his daughter. A woman says she saw the Virgin in a thunderstorm. You nod politely, half skeptic, half dreamer. Faith is the oxygen of this world. You can question it, but you can't escape it. At night, the pilgrims gather around a fire, sharing bread and tales. Someone pulls out a small harp, and the song drifts upward into the stars. The melody isn't grandiose, simple, circular, meant to soothe more than impress. You close your eyes and imagine walking forever under these skies, each step a prayer, each silence an offering. The next morning, the road winds toward a small shrine. It's nothing more than a wooden box nailed to a tree, holding a faded image of a saint. But offerings clutter the base. Ribbons, coins, even a small toy carved from bone. The faith of the common people isn't built on theology. It's built on touch, sight, and scent. The tangible. You reach out and brush the edge of the shrine, and the wood feels warm in the sunlight. For a moment, it's easy to understand why people believed the sacred lived everywhere. You pass through a village where Sunday Mass is the week's highlight. Bells ring wildly, children chase each other around the square, and vendors sell sweet bread at the church door. Inside, the priest preaches in Latin no one understands, but when he lifts the chalice, every knee bends. The ritual matters more than comprehension. The body learns what the mind cannot grasp. Outside, you overhear a heated debate between two men, one claiming that relics from Jerusalem can cure fever, the other insisting they're fakes sold by greedy merchants. You smile. Even faith has a marketplace. Historians still argue whether relics were genuine expressions of devotion or medieval capitalism in disguise. Maybe both. That night, you find shelter at a roadside inn run by nuns. They serve broth, bread, and quiet smiles. One of them tells you stories about visions she's had, lights dancing over the fields, voices in the wind. She doesn't speak like a mystic. She speaks like someone describing the weather. In the medieval world, the supernatural isn't separate from the natural. It's just part of the atmosphere. You drift to sleep in a narrow bed, the faint chant of the sisters echoing through the stone halls. It feels oddly peaceful, as if the whole world hums in tune for once. At dawn, you wake and step outside to find mist hugging the earth. A shepherd drives his flock across the valley, and above him, the monastery bells toll again. You realize that every note of that bell, every prayer, every ritual, every whispered superstition binds this world together more tightly than iron or law ever could. Even the skeptics play their part. Somewhere, a jester cracks jokes about greedy bishops, or a scholar debates whether angels have mass or motion. Doubt, too, becomes devotion in its own strange way. The medieval mind isn't afraid of mystery, it breathes it. You glance back toward the monastery. The monks are already at work, the pilgrims already walking, the farmers already tilling. All under one sky, all believing in something they can't quite touch, but can always feel. Faith here isn't thunder, it's gravity. You don't see it, but it holds everything down, keeps it from flying apart. You take one last look at the horizon. The mist is lifting, sunlight painting the fields gold. For a heartbeat, you feel it, the calm, the rhythm, the certainty that every life, no matter how small, matters because it fits into a larger design. And then the bell tolls again, reminding you it's time to move. The road hums beneath your feet as you leave the monastery lands and descend into a broad valley where the air smells of iron, ash, and ambition. You followed faith long enough to see where belief gives way to invention. Here in the clangor and sweat of medieval industry, another quiet force is shaping the world, the tinkering. Practical genius of people who never called themselves inventors, but changed everything anyway. A distant hammer strikes, then another, until it becomes rhythma, metallic heartbeat pulsing from a forge. You follow the sound toward a village where smoke curls lazily from blacksmith chimneys. Sparks leap like fireflies, and men with arms like tree trunks swing hammers in slow, deliberate arcs. You can almost feel the vibration through your ribs. You stop beside one forge where the blacksmith nods a quick reading. His apprentice pumps the bellows, and the air roars with heat. The smith takes a glowing bar of iron, twists it, and hammers it into shape. For a plow, he grunts. You nod, realizing that this single tool, sharper, stronger, more efficient than wooden ones, means more food, more people, and, eventually, more everything. Historians still argue whether the so-called medieval agricultural revolution was truly a revolution or just a slow accumulation of good ideas. Either way, it began in places like this: iron plows, horseshoes, padded collars for oxen, even the humble nail each, a quiet miracle disguised as metal. The blacksmith quenches the blade in water, steam hissing like a dragon's sigh. He looks up and grins. Magic, eh? You almost believe him. From the forge, you wander into fields humming with life. Farmers guide plows pulled by horses, not oxen now. That switch alone, thanks to the invention of the horse collar, doubles the work a team can do. You watch hooves dig into soil, hear the creak of wood, and realize progress sounds like this: rhythm, repetition, breath. Further down the lane, a mill wheel churns in the river. Water power, another whispering engine of change. You watch the wheel turn, slow but unstoppable, transferring its motion through gears of wood and iron to grind wheat. Inside, the air tastes of flour. The miller's hands move with instinct, checking grain texture, adjusting flow. To him, this is normal. To you, it's mechanical poetry. You look closely at the gears, simple, yes, but brilliant. Each tooth carved by hand, each shaft balanced by intuition. The wheel itself seems alive, its steady motion hypnotic. You blink and almost laugh at the realization. This mill is a medieval factory, and its hum is the first whisper of industrialization. Outside, the miller's wife hangs laundry while children chase chickens. "You want some bread?" she asks, smiling. You nod. The loaf is dense, still warm, and probably enough calories to power a trebuchet. She shrugs. "We bake every day now, thanks to that wheel." Quiet innovation, hiding in plain sight. Here's your first joke tonight. Medieval engineers never worried about work-life balance. Their machines literally worked while they slept. You follow the river downstream, where craftsmen build a bridge. Thick ropes, pulleys, counterweights, organized chaos. The master builder waves his hands, shouting orders. You watch a team hoist a massive stone slab into place, guided by ropes that creak and groan. The structure rising from the water isn't just a bridge, it's confidence made solid. Bridge builders, or pontiffers, were often monks or guild engineers, walking a fine line between faith and math. They used geometry that seems impossibly advanced for their time. Historians still argue whether they rediscovered Roman techniques or invented new ones entirely. Some say they whispered formulas like prayers, afraid that if the church heard too much math, it might smell heresy. By dusk, the bridge stands complete enough to cross. You step onto it, feeling the vibrations of life below, water rushing. Wheels turning, hammers echoing. Each sound is a note in the medieval symphony of progress. On the far bank, a merchant caravan rolls past, wagons stacked with cloth, spices, and barrels of ale. Trade has become the bloodstream of the age. Roads that once served knights now carry goods and gossip. You fall in beside a merchant with a fur-lined cap and a grin that suggests he's cheated more than one tax collector. He tells you proudly that he deals in Wollingland's white gold. You pass bales of it, stacked like treasure. The loom, he says, is transforming fortunes faster than swords ever did. He doesn't lie. In small workshops, spinners twist thread by lamplight, and weavers turn it into cloth that will end up draped over nobles in Florence or Paris. The hum of a loom is another form of prayer, one whispered to prophet instead of heaven. A weaver invites you inside her cottage. The loom dominates the room, a wooden beast of petals and beams. Her feet tap a rhythm, her shuttle flies, and the pattern grows. Green, gold, crimson. The fabric smells faintly of lanolin, a reminder that even luxury begins with sheep. She pauses long enough to sip water and smirk at you. "Want to know the trick?" she says. "It's not the threads, it's the tension." She might be talking about weaving or life. Outside, the merchant laughs. She's right. Everything depends on tension between buyer and seller, church and king, peasant and lord. He's joking, but not really. You travel with him toward a bustling town. As you enter, the sound swells. Carts creak, vendors shout, coins clink. Market stalls bloom like flowers, iron tools, leather boots, fish, honey, books. You smell smoke, salt, and ambition. Somewhere a minstrel plays a lutovki, singing about a knight who lost his armor but kept his pride. Amid the noise, you spot another wonder. A clock tower, its wooden gears ticking behind a painted face. The merchant points proudly. "Newest in the city," he says. "Built last year." You stare at the hands moving steadily, time itself, now mechanical. Before this, life ran on bells and sunlight. Now, minutes have metal teeth. Historians still argue where the first true clock appeared, maybe England. Maybe Italy, but this one, crude as it is, has changed everything. Work days are measured, prayers timed, meetings enforced. Time has become a tool, not a mystery. You can almost feel it tighten around your wrist like a watch strap. As night falls, lamps flicker along the street's glass-covered oil flames that barely hold back the dark. The merchant waves you toward a tavern. Inside, tradesmen and scholars argue over ale. One young man insists that machines will someday do human work. The others laugh him out of the room. Impossible. They shout. You smile, knowing how that story ends. A tinker in the corner sharpens knives on a whetstone, humming to himself. He carries a bag full of odd inventions, hinges, locks, springs. People think I'm mad, he says, but wait until they see my self-turning spit for roasting meat. You chuckle. That's joke number 2 tonight. You ask him where he learned his craft. He shrugs. Nowhere. I watch, I try. I fail, I try again. Innovation, medieval style. No patents, no laboratories, just curiosity and calloused hands. Outside, the sky clears, and stars blink like sparks scattered across black velvet. Somewhere, in another workshop, a young apprentice experiments with glass lenses, trying to make distant things appear closer. In a few decades, someone will call that invention a telescope. For now, it's just a hobby gone wrong. The road turns north through a mining valley where torches flicker in the dark. Men crawl into the earth, hacking silver, iron, and salt from stone. Their tools clatter like bones. Mining is brutal, but it fuels everything above ground: coins, weapons, even church bells. You realize progress has a cost: sweat, lungs full of dust, lives traded for gleaming metal. At the mouth of one mine, a woman sharpens pickaxes. My husband went in, she says quietly, but the mountain kept him. She shrugs, keeps working. Her resilience feels older than faith. Back in the light, the air cools. You reach another village where carpenters build ships. The smell of tar and oak fills your nose. Hulls rise like ribs against the sky. The master shipwright traces lines in the dirt with a stick, murmuring measurements. His apprentices listen as if he's preaching. A ship, he says, is just a cathedral that floats. You grin. Maybe the best line of the day. Historians still argue whether the medieval shipyards of Venice and Genoa birthed the modern world. But standing here, watching men and women craft vessels that will someday reach Africa, Asia, or the New World, you can almost feel the horizon expanding. You climb aboard one half-finished hull. It smells of salt, resin, and potential. The master gestures proudly. She'll carry wool to Flanders and spices back again. Trade keeps peace, he adds. You're not sure if that's optimism or denial. As twilight deepens, you realize how interconnected all these forces are: the forge, the mill, the loom, the bridge, the clock, the ship. Each invention feeds the next, a chain reaction of quiet brilliance. You pause by the river again, watching water glide under the bridge. It turns the mill wheel, powers the forge bellows, fills ship's sails downstream. Energy itself has become part of the medieval story. You smile softly. Maybe progress isn't a storm, after all. Maybe it's a river. The night hums with life wheels turning, gears grinding, fires glowing red in the distance. Somewhere, a blacksmith's hammer still echoes, just like the masons did in the last town. You realize the sound never truly stops. It just moves, passing from hand to hand, generation to generation. And when you finally rest by the riverbank, eyes half closed, the gentle rhythm of progress still murmurs in your ears, lullaby made of iron, wood, and will. You wake before dawn to the sound of wagons rattling over cobblestones, wheels squealing under the weight of barrels and bolts of cloth. The air smells of smoke, spice, and damp wool. You've left the river valleys and the mills behind. Now, You're stepping into the true arteries of the medieval world, the trade routes, and the money that quietly rewired everything. You stretch, rub the sleep from your eyes, and realize this place never really sleeps. Even in the half-light, merchants haggle, sailors shout, coins clink. You're in a port city, a crossroads of languages and ambitions. The kind of place where a sack of pepper is worth a horse and gossip travels faster than ships. A merchant waves at you from a stall, overflowing with fabrics. "You look like a traveler," he says, grinning. "Care to buy something from the East?" You pick up a piece of silk so fine it feels like water between your fingers. "Came all the way from Cathay," he brags. You nod, knowing he probably bought it 3 stalls down from a man who bought it from someone else who heard it might have come from Cathay. Medieval supply, chains reliable as ever. The docks stretch for miles. Ships creak at their moorings, sails furled, hulls stained with salt. Dockworkers shout in half a dozen languages: Italian, Arabic, Greek, French, each word blending into a symphony of commerce. The sea is the internet of the Middle Ages, carrying not just goods, but ideas, rumors, and recipes. A fisherman nearby mends his nets, pausing to scratch his beard. "They say in Venice, they make glass so clear you can see your sins in it," he jokes. "That's your first laugh tonight," you reply. "Then I'd rather keep my old mugs cloudy." He grins, nodding. The sea connects everything, but it also mirrors everyone's secrets. You walk along the waterfront and spot a man counting coins with alarming speed. He's a money changer, sitting behind a wooden counter engraved with symbols. Small bags of silver, gold, and copper glint in the weak morning light. He notices you watching and beckons you closer. "Don't look so suspicious," he says. "It's honest work mostly." He explains his trade, converting currencies from one city to another, tracking debts, lending money. "Kings may rule," he adds, "but they still borrow." You raise an eyebrow. "From you?" He smiles slyly. "From men like me, historians still argue whether medieval bankers were visionaries or parasites. The truth, as usual, depends on who's telling the story. But the fact remains, money became fluid, abstract, powerful. Invisible wealth built visible empires. You watch him scribble numbers into a small parchment ledger, his quill moving like a magician's wand. "Double-entry bookkeeping," he says proudly. "Venetian method. Keeps things neat." You realize you're witnessing the invention of modern accounting, an idea that would someday fuel capitalism itself. Strange how something so boring-looking could move mountains. Beyond the docks, a caravan prepares to leave. Horses snort, camels groan, and men wrap scarves around their faces. One merchant shouts that he's bound for Bruges, another for Constantinople. You fall in with them as they pass the gates, the city shrinking behind you. The road is alive with travelers, pilgrims, soldiers, scholars, thieves. But it's the merchants who rule it. Their carts carry spices, wool, wine, metal, salt, and news. Every stop along the way is a miniature world, connected to every other by a web of barter and trust. At a crossroads tavern, you stop for stew that tastes faintly of garlic and regret. A trader beside you leans in conspiratorially. "Want to hear something mad?" In Genoa, they say men invest in voyages they never sail in and get rich from them. You blink. He's describing a stock exchange. He laughs at your expression. "Crazy, eh? Making money from paper?" Historians still argue whether medieval joint stock ventures were proto-capitalism or just elaborate gambling. But the idea caught fire. Risk became currency, and credit became courage. You can almost feel the world's pulse quicken. You pass through a town where the market square buzzes with color. Saffron from the east, furs from the north, sugar from Sicily. People crowd around a man selling dried figs, arguing loudly over price. You catch a phrase, "fair trade or I walk," and you realize that even in the Middle Ages, marketing began with drama. The merchant guilds run everything here. They decide who trades, what's taxed, what's banned. Behind their polite smiles lies a ruthless efficiency. Their ledgers are cleaner than their consciences. But they built cities Florence, Lubeck, Genton, nothing more than trust, parchment, and obsession. As dusk falls, you arrive in a great market hall. Torches flicker, shadows dance on high beams. The smell of beeswax and coin fills the air. Merchants count profits, scribes record deals, guards watch everything with bored precision. In the corner, a troubadour sings a song about a sailor who sold his soul for pepper. The crowd laughs, tosses coins, and keeps bargaining. Even art here bends toward commerce. You notice a young woman hunched over a table covered in scales and weights. She's measuring silver dust, actual currency, not coins. You ask if it's dangerous to work with so much wealth unguarded. She shrugs. I trust the math more than the men. That line stays with you longer than it should. Outside, night deepens. Lanterns sway along the dockside, casting trembling reflections on the water. The harbor smells of pitch and dreams. A group of sailors loads crates stamped with foreign sigil, some from Alexandria, others from ports so distant their names sound like spells. You stand there, imagining what's inside. Cinnamon, nutmeg, indigo, lapis. Luxury turned into leverage. You realize that while kings fight wars for glory, merchants fight them for trade routes, win more often. A ship's captain invites you aboard for a cup of wine. The deck rocks gently under your feet. He tells you about his voyager storms. Pirates, bribes. You think the sea belongs to the gods? He says, swirling his drink. No, it belongs to whoever can pay the toll. He laughs, teeth flashing gold. Here's your second joke tonight. Sailors don't fear drowning, they fear bad credit. You both laugh. The sound lost to the wind, but he's right. The medieval world runs not on faith alone, but on IOUs, trust, and contracts sealed with wax and crossed fingers. Days pass as you travel inland again, following a merchant convoy through alpine passes. The air grows colder, sharper. Mules grunt, bells jingle, and the snow crunches underfoot. It's dangerous here, bandits, avalanches, frostbite, but trade doesn't stop. A single spice chest can pay for an army. At a mountain inn, a mapmaker shows you his latest creation, a parchment crisscrossed with lines and strange names. Not all roads lead to Rome anymore, he says, grinning. Some lead to profit. You trace a route eastward and see cities like Tabriz, Samarkand, and Kashgar. The Silk Road, threads of commerce stitched across continents. You think of the hands that touch each object along the way. Miners, dyers, weavers, sailors, scribes. Each adds a piece of themselves to the chain. Trade isn't just movement, it's memory. Historians still argue whether globalization truly began in the medieval age. But as you stand there, the evidence seems hard to ignore. Languages blending, ideas crossing borders. Prices linked from Venice to Delhi. The medieval world isn't isolated, it's interlaced. By the time you reach the next city, you can feel it in your bones. Money has become magic. It transforms labor into freedom, goods into power, paper into authority. Even the church, once the guardian of souls, now issues indulgences like currency. Faith itself is being monetized. At a candlelit table in a banker's home, you see promissory notes stacked like holy relics. He dips his quill, signs his name, and hands one to a noble. 1,000 florins, he says. Payable on your return from the crusade. The noble nods, armored fingers trembling slightly. You realize you've just watched credit invented on a human scale, trust written into existence. Later, you walk through the silent streets, past shuttered windows, and the smell of distant bread. Somewhere, a bell tolls, marking not prayer this time, but curfew. Even time itself bends to the economics of safety. You pause at a fountain, listening to the faint echo of coins dropped in for luck. Wishes, commerce, faith, blurring together. The medieval world runs on this alchemy. Hope turned into trade, risk turned into rhythm, and as you drift toward sleep under the shadow of the city walls, you finally understand why they called merchants builders of empires. They never needed swords, just ledgers and patience. The morning fog hugs the city walls as you leave the bustling market streets behind. You step into a quieter lane where cobblestones glint with dew, and the smell of wet leather and ink drifts from small shops. Here, the force that shaped the medieval world is neither hammer nor coin, neither prayer nor plow is knowledge. Fragile and flickering, held in libraries, scriptoriums, and the minds of scholars who risk ridicule, censure, or worse, for the sake of understanding. You enter a university town, barely awake, the streets empty, save for a few monks carrying books in cloth wrappings. The buildings are tall, narrow, leaning slightly as if straining toward the heavens. Students, young and eager, stumble from dormitories, rubbing sleep from their eyes while debates about Aristotle echo through the air. This is a place where thought itself becomes a tool and a weapon. You wander into a lecture hall where a professor scratches chalk across a slate, drawing diagrams of the heavens. You don't understand the Latin perfectly, but the shapes, the circles, triangles, and lines speak a language beyond words. The stars, he says, move not randomly, but according to divine harmony. Historians still argue whether medieval astronomy was purely mystical or a first step toward scientific reasoning. Either way, the knowledge is powerful, and people recognize its subtle authority. In a scriptorium, the scent of parchment and ink surrounds you. Monks bend over desks, copying texts painstakingly by hand. Quills scratching softly, candles flickering as shadows dance across their robes. Each word is preserved against time, each margin sometimes filled with tiny sketches. Dragons, faces, even coded symbols. Some scholars whisper that these doodles encode secret knowledge, ideas too dangerous to write plainly. You lean closer, tracing one of the curled shapes with your finger. It feels like touching a whisper from the past. Here's your first joke tonight. Imagine painstakingly copying 1,000 pages by hand, only to realize you've spelled the king's name wrong on page 7. Job security? Maybe. Panic? Definitely. You follow a young scholar carrying a bundle of scrolls into the sunlight. He tells you about his latest study translations of Arabic mathematics into Latin. 0, he says, his eyes shining. It changes everything. And indeed, it does. Without 0, counting, astronomy, engineering, civilization itself stumbles. Some mathematicians resisted it for centuries, calling it unnatural or even heretical. Historians still argue whether the introduction of Arabic numerals truly revolutionized Europe or merely smoothed an inevitable transition. But watching him sketch numbers in the dust, you feel the subtle magic of discovery. You wander through narrow streets lined with booksellers, where parchment, ink, and printed texts begin to circulate in whispers. This is before Gutenberg, but the idea of reproducing knowledge, of making it accessible, is in the air. Students argue over philosophy in the squares, challenging their teachers. Scribes noting the debates for later study. Knowledge travels slower than a ship or a caravan, but it travels nonetheless. At the university gates, a debate has drawn a small crowd. A scholar argues that the natural world can be measured, calculated, even predicted. Another insists that only God governs the cosmos. The crowd murmurs, some nodding, some shaking heads. You realize that in this tension between reason and faith, civilization stretches, testing the limits of what can be understood. In a small back alley, an apothecary grinds herbs and minerals into powders, explaining to a student the principles of balance. Hot, cold, wet, dry. The mixtures are medicine and metaphor, and the student carefully notes every step. You glance at a jar labeled aqua vita and smile, another precursor to the chemistry of tomorrow. The boundaries between science, superstition, and spirituality are blurred, and perhaps that is why knowledge thrives here. You pause to watch a student laboring over a telescope lens. Though crude, it magnifies distant objects and hints at what will one day allow humans to map the stars, moons, and planets with unprecedented precision. Here, the quiet force is both curiosity and persistence, the willingness to try, fail, and try again. Every small discovery, every copied manuscript, every heated argument contributes to the invisible scaffolding of future empires. In the evening, you find a small tavern filled with scholars who discuss ideas as eagerly as merchants haggle over spices. They drink ale and argue over ethics, metaphysics, and the natural world. One young philosopher mutters about the impossibility of motion, which earns a chuckle from a friend who reminds him that birds seem to fly just fine. You realize that medieval humor, like knowledge, often hides a serious point. That's joke number 2 tonight. Outside, the sun sets behind towers and spires, casting long shadows over the square. Lanterns flicker to life, illuminating the carved faces of gargoyles perched high above. Even these grotesque figures, you notice, often served as lessons warnings of sin. Reminders of virtue, tiny moral textbooks sculpted in stone for the illiterate. Knowledge isn't only written, it's built, sung, gestured, embodied. At the edges of town, a secretive alchemist experiments with metals and herbs, searching for elixirs and gold. Though many dismiss him as a fool, some argue that alchemy contains the seeds of chemistry, of experimentation, of a methodical approach to understanding matter. Historians still argue whether alchemy contributed anything concrete to science or was purely mystical theater. You watch his tiny flames dance in the dark and can't help but be hypnotized by the devotion itself. Night deepens, and you wander back to the lecture hall. The scholar you met in the morning is now closing his books, exhausted but triumphant. Tomorrow, he says, we'll try to understand planetary motion a little better. His words feel small, but in them, the weight of civilization presses. Small ideas here become foundations there, building brick by brick, a world more complex, more curious, more capable. You step onto the empty streets. The smell of candle wax and ink lingers, the quiet echo of pages turning still in your ears. Somewhere, a cat slinks past, its eyes glinting with the same curiosity that animates the scholars. You realize that knowledge is like this cat, elusive, patient, ready to pounce on opportunity. Before you leave the town, you peek into a small chapel tucked between 2 lecture halls. A student prays softly, perhaps for insight, perhaps for patience. The quiet, you understand, is as powerful as any bell or hammer strike. Knowledge does not shout. It whispers, and those who listen carefully may change the world. You wander to the city gates, taking a last look at the streets now empty except for flickering lanterns. Libraries, workshops, scriptoriums, filled with minds hungry for understanding. Faith, work, trade, invention, they all intersect here, but knowledge is the glue, holding the threads together, invisible yet indispensable. You step beyond the walls into the night, feeling the cool air on your face. Somewhere down the road, a student debates a formula. A monk copies a text by candlelight. A tinker sketches a device no one will understand for decades. Their work, quiet as it may be, builds the invisible architecture of the medieval mind. And as you walk toward the distant hills, you understand that civilization survives not only through kings, battles, or plows, but through countless small acts of thinking, recording, questioning, and imagining. This is the force that hums beneath the clamor of the Middle Ages, shaping a future few can yet see. The night grows deeper, stars dotting the sky like scattered ink drops. You find a quiet bench under a tree. Close your eyes and let the whispers of knowledge, faith, labor, and commerce drift through your mind. The world may be dark and uncertain, but these silent forces ensure that it continues, grows, and persists in ways both magnificent and subtle. The first light of dawn warms your shoulders as you step out of the quiet university town and onto a winding road that snakes through forests and hills. The air smells of pine, damp earth, and distant smoke. You're entering a domain that few travelers notice, but whose influence flows into every aspect of medieval life. The subtle, pervasive power of law, custom, and the enforcement of order. Here, in codes written on parchment, in the weight of a lord's judgment, and in the quiet authority of local traditions, civilizations are held together. You arrive at a walled town, gates opening reluctantly as the day begins. Soldiers adjust chainmail, merchants carry goods, and the town crier bellows announcements that echo off stone. You notice the small things, the marks on doors that indicate taxes paid, the edges of streets swept clean, the way villagers bow instinctively as the reeve passes. These small gestures are part of a vast, invisible machinery of law, keeping daily life moving smoothly, or at least predictably. You follow the sounds of a dispute in the market square. Two men argue over a missing sack of grain. A local official steps forward, staff in hand, and mediates the conflict. His word matters. Contracts, fines, and customary penalties are enforced not just by fear, but by the legitimacy that centuries of precedent confer. Historians still argue whether medieval justice was equitable or merely functional. Yet there is no denying its centrality. Civilization runs on trust, and enforcement of rules builds that trust. You pause by a tavern, where a group of town elders is seated in judgment. Their discussion ranges from disputes over boundaries to inheritance claims. You realize that what seems like bureaucratic drudgery is actually a form of quiet governance, keeping communities coherent and tensions manageable. Without these rituals of authority, life would be chaos. Inside, a scribe records every word meticulously. Quill scratches across parchment, and the sound feels both ordinary and sacred. Some scribes whisper that their notes can outlast kings, wars, and fires. Perhaps this is true. After all, even now, you can trace their work centuries later. Legal documentation is memory codified, a tool as powerful as any sword. Outside, peasants guide oxen along the main street, heads bowed in respect to the town's customs. Every action in this world is framed by law. When to plant, when to harvest, when to pay tithes, when to attend court. You trudge alongside them and notice how deeply these patterns shape daily behavior. Without knowing it, people internalize the law. It becomes rhythm, second nature. A little farther along, you encounter a nobleman riding slowly, a retinue of guards behind him. He wears a chain of office, a visible symbol of authority. His power, while absolute to some, is bounded by precedent, oath, and local custom. Even kings, you realize, operate within a lattice of expectations and obligations. Historians still argue whether feudal law empowered peasants more than absolute rule ever could. But either way, the system channels ambition, obedience, and survival into a coherent structure. You turn down a quiet lane and see a group of villagers building a bridge under the supervision of a local master. The project is communal. Everyone contributes labor, materials, and oversight. The law dictates obligations, yet cooperation comes from something deeper, a sense of shared responsibility rooted in custom. Order is maintained not just by decree, but by social expectation, reinforced generation after generation. A little girl plays nearby, drawing symbols in the dirt. Her parents glance toward her and smile, knowing she is learning the unspoken rules of the world. How to behave, when to speak, what is expected. You smile quietly yourself. Society is not only enforced through written codes, but also through the slow, almost invisible transmission of norms, values, and habits. By midday, you reach a courthouse at the center of the town. Inside, a judge reads cases aloud to a modest crowd. Laws of inheritance, theft, and property are argued with calm precision. Even the weight of tradition carries authority. Precedent matters more than rhetoric. You notice one peculiar case where a man claims a cow stolen by his neighbor actually wandered into a churchyard and became holy by accident. The room murmurs. Historians still debate whether such instances were sincere belief, clever loopholes, or storytelling in pursuit of justice. Outside again, you notice small inscriptions etched into stone over doorways, reminders of the town's charter. One reads, "Justice for all, if you can afford it." You can't help but chuckle at the irony. A third joke tonight. But it's a reminder that law, like faith or trade, is a framework, not perfection. Its power lies in consistency and perception, more than fairness. As you move toward the outskirts, the road narrows, leading into farmland, where peasants obey customary practices that have endured for generations. The timing of planting, the rotation of fields, even the construction of homes, follows unwritten laws that function as reliably as any statute. Tradition enforces itself. Sometimes the quietest forces are also the strongest. You reach a small village council where disputes over water rights and grazing land are being mediated. Everyone listens, weighs, nods. Even without formal education, people participate in governance because social cohesion demands it. They know, instinctively, that life depends on cooperation and rule following. You realize that medieval law is not only about punishment. It is a scaffolding for survival. By evening, you find a quiet bench near the town square. The air smells of evening fires and cooked bread. Lanterns flicker across cobblestones as night falls. You watch as officials close shop, merchants count coins, and families return home. Every action reflects layers of authority, from the king to the local reeve, reinforced by custom, habit, and expectation. You pause to reflect on what you've seen. Law is invisible, yet omnipresent. It operates through text, ritual, observation, and fear. It binds, protects, and constrains. Without it, trade collapses, agriculture falters, communities splinter. In a way, law is the quietest of all medieval engines, more enduring than a plow, a hammer, or a bell. A minstrel begins to play nearby, singing a tale of a clever thief outwitting a greedy lord. The story underscores the tension between authority and cleverness, obedience and subversion. Even in play, law shapes thought. Humor and rule, after all, are never entirely separate. Night deepens. The town grows still except for the occasional bark of a dog or the echo of a distant bell. You sit quietly, imagining all the invisible threads, contracts, customs, precedents holding this community together. You see now that order in the Middle Ages was not a simple top-down imposition, but a multi-layered network of responsibilities, incentives, and expectations. Somewhere, a child dreams of adventure, a scribe dreams of accuracy, and a merchant dreams of profit. Law silently guides them all. It whispers in their routines, frames their ambitions, and defines the boundaries of possibility. Its power is quiet, pervasive, subtle, yet undeniable. You close your eyes, breathing in the cool night air, letting the city's rhythm seep into your bones. Cobblestones, lanterns, voices, and traditions blend into a faint, steady pulse. This quiet force law and custom shapes every step, every transaction, every moment. Civilization itself rises and persists on such delicate, persistent architecture. And as sleep drifts toward you, you realize, in the medieval world, the sword is loud, the bell is noticeable, the mill turns with purpose. But the true lasting power often lies in the invisible structures, in the quiet codes that govern daily life. Dawn paints the horizon in pale gold as you step beyond the town gates and into the countryside once more. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of freshly plowed fields, wildflowers, and the faint temps of smoke from distant hearths. You sense that tonight's journey reaches its crescendo with the clang of hammers or the clash of armies, but with the invisible threads of culture, memory, and imagination that silently shaped the medieval world. Story, song, ritual, and myth, they are forces that endure longer than stone, steel, or parchment, embedding themselves in the very psyche of a civilization. You follow a winding dirt path to a hilltop where a minstrel strums a lute, the notes fluttering in the morning breeze. A small audience gathers, peasants, scholars, merchants, all seated on the grass. The song tells of dragons, knights, and lost kingdoms, but beneath the spectacle is something subtler. These tales teach morals, preserve history, and connect communities across generations. Even the illiterate participate in a shared memory, a living archive transmitted orally. Historians still argue whether oral culture slowed or accelerated intellectual progress, but you sense its quiet power everywhere you look. A troupe of actors performs nearby, enacting a morality play. Villains and saints, sin and virtue, all paraded across the wooden stage. You watch as townspeople laugh, gasp, and murmur advice to the characters. Theater here is more than entertainment. It's a medium of instruction, communal reflection, and subtle social regulation. Every gesture, line, and costume encodes values and warnings. You notice how carefully even the smallest children mimic the actions later, absorbing lessons without realizing it. As you move deeper into the village, you notice shrines tucked into alleys, crosses carved into doorframes, and small statues of saints peeking from gardens. Faith persists in microcosms, personal, quiet, omnipresent. People pray not only in grand cathedrals, but in kitchens, fields, and on roadsides, blending spirituality seamlessly with everyday life. The mundane becomes sacred, and the sacred permeates the mundane. You pause by a well where women draw water, exchanging gossip and advice. One tells another about a dream she had, which she interprets as a warning. Another recounts a local legend about a clever fox who outwitted a cruel lord. These stories circulate, shaping behavior and expectations. Myth and reality blur. Scholars still debate how much folklore influenced legal, social, or religious norms, but you see it clearly. Culture moves quietly, subtly, yet profoundly. You follow a path into a dense forest, the sunlight dappling the mossy ground. Somewhere, a shepherd whistles, calling sheep from the slopes. Birds chatter overhead. Here, in the solitude of nature, imagination thrives. The forest is alive with unseen creatures, sprites, spirits, and the whispers of old tales. People navigate these spaces armed with both tools and stories, blending observation with inherited belief. It's a kind of knowledge that survives disasters, invasions, and famines, resilient because it is woven into the mind as deeply as bread is baked into the daily diet. By midday, you reach a monastery perched on a cliff, sunlight glinting off stained glass. Inside, monks copy manuscripts, sing chants, and maintain libraries. Some study medicine, astronomy, or philosophy. Others preserve epic tales or local chronicles. Each act is an attempt to capture memory, to transmit culture beyond the frailty of flesh. The monastery hums with quiet diligence. Even in solitude, culture propagates. Without these efforts, the medieval world would have been less cohesive, less able to survive waves of conquest, plague, or famine. Outside, in the gardens, a novice reads poetry aloud to the wind, committing lines to memory. You notice the care with which words are enunciated, the pauses, the emphasis. Oral tradition and written preservation converge here, ensuring that culture survives across generations. Every song, every chant, every legend, these are instruments of continuity. Historians still debate the degree to which monastic preservation stifled innovation versus safeguarding knowledge, but you sense the balance was delicate and essential. As evening falls, you wander through a village festival. Lanterns sway, children chase each other, musicians play lutes and flutes, dancers twirl. You smell roasted meat, hear laughter, see coins changing hands, and sense the rhythm of a society alive. Every festival, every shared meal, every story passed along contributes to social cohesion. Culture here functions like gravity, unseen, often ignored, yet holding everything in orbit. A juggler tosses flaming torches while reciting a short verse about honesty and greed. A crowd applauds, laughs, and the children mimic the rhyme afterward. You realize that humor, morality, and social instruction are seamlessly integrated. And yes, You grin, there's your third joke tonight, hidden in the medieval punchline. Night settles, and the village quiets. You walk to the edge of a cliff, overlooking the darkened landscape, the silhouettes of towers, forests, and rivers stretched below. You reflect on the invisible forces you've witnessed: faith, labor, innovation, trade, knowledge, law, and now culture. Each is a silent architect of society, pushing and pulling at lives, shaping outcomes, and building a world without the clamor of armies or decrees. The stars appear, pinpricks of silver against a velvet sky. Somewhere, a minstrel strums a lone note. A scribe bends over a manuscript by candlelight. A child recites a tale she heard that morning. You feel the resonance of continuity, the subtle persistence of forces that rarely boast but always endure. The medieval world may seem harsh, chaotic, and brutal to modern eyes, yet it thrives on these quiet currents. You step back, letting the night embrace you. The wind carries the distant toll of a bell, the laughter of lingering villagers, and the faint scent of smoke and earth. All these small, invisible acts, the copying of a manuscript, the telling of a story, the performance of a ritual, have quietly built a civilization. And though empires rise and fall, the patterns persist. As you lie down on the hilltop, the cool grass beneath you, you feel the rhythm of the world's slow. Faith, labor, trade, knowledge, law, and culture, the secret, quiet force is still moved beneath the surface. They're the foundation, the hidden scaffolding, the heartbeat that keeps the Middle Ages alive long after individual lives vanish. You close your eyes and let it all drift past you. The hammer striking iron, the plow turning soil, the bell tolling in the morning mist, the merchant counting coins, the monk copying manuscripts, the judge weighing decisions, the child learning tales. The soundscape is a lullaby, subtle but steady, soothing and complete. And as sleep takes you gently into its embrace, you sense that civilization itself is a living story, written not only in texts and treaties, but in the invisible, persistent rhythms of human endeavor, imagination, and memory.